See if we can get that up. We're going to try to get everyone seated. They're coming across. There we go. There we go. Ryan's got me going now. If everyone could find their seat, please. We're going to try to get our program started this morning. Looks like most everyone has enjoyed their breakfast this morning, so if you could find a way to your table, we'll get our program started here in a minute or two. All right, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Washington County Chamber of Commerce's Decision 24 Forum. Today, we are featuring the candidates for Maryland's 6th Congressional District. As you've probably noticed, I'm not Paul Fry. Unfortunately, this event was scheduled for another date. Paul had made some vacation plans, so he is now enjoying some time right now, well-deserved time on the beach. So you're going to have to put up with me today. I'll do my best to have my inner Paul Fry come out, keep us on time, and hopefully we'll have some lively conversation today. This is being broadcast through Facebook Live, so maybe we can all give Paul a wave if he's watching. Paul, we hope you're enjoying yourself on the beach. All right, so for those who don't know me, I'm Tim Troxel. I'm the government affairs person for First Energy Potomac Edison, and I'm also a current board member on the Chamber. So that's why they've asked me to fill in here this morning. Our sponsor this morning for the event is Jamison Door Company. Most of you probably know Jamison. They've been a Hagerstown staple for over 100 years here in Hagerstown. And I'd like to invite Dwight Clark, the president and CEO, to come up and say a few words as a sponsor.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dwight Clark. I'm president and CEO for Jamison Door Companies. We've been an integral part of the Washington County community, the Hagerstown community, for over 118 years. And we feel it's a privilege to be able to sponsor events such as this. It's a give back to the public, and we look forward to this forum today. Thank you.
Thanks again, Dwight. We appreciate your sponsorship. I know you all have done these forums for a number of years, so really appreciate it. All right, we have a few officials in the room this morning that I would like to recognize. So if you could please give a warm welcome to our former mayor of Hagerstown and the new special secretary of opioid response, Emily Keller. Emily. We have Hagerstown Council member Shelley McIntyre. And we also have Hagerstown Council member Peter Perini. Are there any electeds that snuck in that we didn't see? All right, I think we're good. Who'd we miss? Brooke. Oh, did Brooke stay? She was here earlier, and she said she wasn't going to be able to stay. But thank you. All right. So this morning, I was informed that it is Support Your Local Chamber of Commerce Day. Did anybody else know that? Well, thanks for everyone for coming this morning for breakfast and supporting your local Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber helps local businesses succeed. The entire community benefits when our businesses succeed. So let's take a moment today to recognize the Chamber staff, who are the ones that make all these Chamber events happen. How about a round of applause for Donna and Brianna, Maddie and Paul on Facebook. We appreciate everything you all do for the organization. All right, so now moving on to the real reason that you all are here this morning, and that's to hear the Congressional Forum for the 6th District of Maryland. Everyone, I'm sure, received an etiquette card when they came in this morning, and please read it. Please abide by those rules. We ask that you follow them, and if you don't, we have someone here to escort you out. So hopefully we won't have to resort to that this morning. All right, moderating today's forum is going to be Richard Wilson with the League of Women Voters of Washington County. Please help me in welcoming him, as well as our two candidates, April McLean Delaney and Neil Parrott, up to the front.
We have arranged the questions that our Government Affairs Committee has put together this morning in such a way that both of you will have equal amount of time on air this morning. We've got 15 seconds here and there for me to ask the questions, and we will try to do that in a very forthright manner. Our purpose this morning is to learn about the issues that are before voters. In our last congressional cycle, one thing I stressed was that there are people here that are going to go talk to other people at home about what they saw this morning and how the policies that you would advocate if elected. And so we want to keep our focus on the policies and a little bit less on the personalities if we can. So our first few questions this morning will focus on Washington County and the economy. But before we need to remind you then that there is a timing mechanism in place. And I will tell you as I ask the question how many minutes you have for answering your questions. But when you are within 15 seconds of the expiration of your time, Donna will hold up the 15-second card, the yellow card. And when your time expires, she will hold up the red card. And if you do not finish the sentence that you are in the middle of, your microphone will go dead. So people here in the room probably will be able to hear you, but people in the Facebook audience will not. And we will be proceeding to go to the next comment. So it would be advantageous if you could begin wrapping up your comments when you see the yellow, and don't play with red. So we would like to give you 2 minutes to introduce yourselves to begin. And please include what you see as your most important responsibilities as our prospective representative in Congress. Mr. Parrott, we will begin with you.
Well, good morning. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate the opportunity that we have to be able to talk about different issues. Thank you for moderating. Thank the Chamber of Commerce. You know, I am Neil Parrott. I've lived in Maryland my entire life. I grew up in Anne Arundel County, went to the University of Maryland at College Park and got my civil engineering degree. After that, I worked for the State Highway Administration for about 15 years. Half of that in Annapolis. I took a promotion and went to Frederick, and that was when I first got married in '99, so we're about to celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary this coming November. We're thankful for that. After the State Highway, I was the Deputy Director of Public Works at the City of Frederick. That's basically their city engineer. After that, I graduated from Mount St. Mary's University with my MBA. I started my own company, Traffic Solutions Incorporated, which is right here in Hagerstown. Very, very thankful to be able to contribute to the community there. Also to contribute to the community through volunteerism. My wife, April, and I, we started the Hagerstown Area Summer Swimming Program, where even this summer we had 200 children that were learning swim lessons and going through swim team. Really great idea to make sure there was a need here, and we need to make sure that people are safe around the water. And so we've been able to work with the Boys and Girls Club as part of that program and teach some of their children how to swim. They wouldn't have had that opportunity any other way. So serving the community is something that I am passionate about and would be very thankful that we've been able to do that. You know, as I go look towards being a congressman, you know, I've been a delegate here serving for 12 years. And as a delegate, I was very thankful to be able to serve the community with constituent services, people who came in. I want to do the same thing in D.C. People are going to have different issues, different concerns, and they need to be addressed. A lot of times they need some help to get through the bureaucracy. So that's one thing. Another thing, I just wanted to continue to serve this community that I've been such a vital part of. And I want to thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Ms. Delaney, same question.
So I too thank the local chamber here and for really convening this, because I think it's so important for voters to understand candidates, their perspectives, and their background. I'm actually a big supporter of local chambers of commerce because I believe that really innovation, workforce development, and job creation is really furthered in local communities. And most recently, I served at the Department of Commerce, actually rolling out a $42.5 billion infrastructure broadband bill, worked on our national strategy on spectrum, oversaw the FirstNet responder network, and really worked on U.S. competitiveness overseas vis-a-vis China with respect to a lot of our telecom services. My husband and I both have founded startups, and we really believe in the free and creative, free enterprise and creative economy. But it's really important as I look forward is that we really invest and drive infrastructure investment into the 6th District. So lifting up just a little bit about me, I am a common sense, common ground candidate, mother of 4. Grew up in Buell, Idaho, was blessed to go to Georgetown Law School by scholarship, worked in business, satellite, helped found a nonprofit dealing with kids' safety, and then worked at the Department of Commerce. Most recently, and yesterday, I did receive actually the full backing of the United States United States Chamber, and I spoke with their chair of their board, and they said how important it is to work together with innovation and coming together across the aisle to work on business and also the pressing issues of our country. I'm going to focus on, in Congress, affordability of housing, infrastructure for 270, and all of our infrastructure needs with broadband, our immigration, and also coming together in community to solve our most taxing problems. I look forward to talking today about all these issues.
Thank you, Ms. Delaney. I did not tell you all that the order of speaking was randomly arrived at. Sometimes you will have answered a question and you'll find that I'm asking you a follow-up of a totally different flavor. But Parrott and Delaney and Parrott are going to be equal time. So moving on, Mr. Parrott, this question will be for you, and you'll have 1 minute for your response. The federal deficit has recently grown under both Republican and Democratic administrations. How would you describe a manageable federal deficit, and what is your strategy to achieve that target?
It's a real shame that we have the debt that we have. It's more than a real shame. It's actually really hurting us. When you look at just the interest that we're paying on the debt, if you combine all the spending on Medicare and all the spending on our U.S. military together, the interest on the debt each year is greater than that. We have to change that. We cannot continue. We're not too big to fail. We actually can fail. Argentina did, where they got themselves into too much debt, and they couldn't recover. They had 100% inflation year after year. We need to balance the budget now. Now's the time to get it done. When you send me to Congress, that's going to be one of the biggest things I want to do. I blame a lot of the inflation that happened under the Biden-Harris administration as a result of this great debt that they took on that we didn't have. Trillions of dollars of spending and borrowing from China that we didn't have. As a result, inflation has gone up. I support a balanced budget amendment, and when you send me to D.C., I'll be working with others to make sure that we get spending under control and that we grow the economy to reduce the debt.
Ms. Delaney, your response?
Yes. The issue of the debt is a very important issue that we have to address. But I must say, I believe that both Republicans and Democrats have gotten us into this place, and both Republicans and Democrats are going to have to roll up their sleeves and really talk about it and get us out of there. So it's going to have to be really looking at waste, looking at different programs that need to be cut, but a balanced approach where we just don't have across the board 10% willy-nilly, but really strategically thinking about the things that we need to focus on. We also really need to look at our Social Security, our Medicare, and our Medicaid, and look at ways that we can reform it, but also keep these important programs going forward. And then look at ways that we can also address as we look at high interest rates and different ways that we can restructure our economy and also grow and innovate our economy so we can bring in more revenue and be more competitive internationally on the global stage.
Okay, thank you. So, Ms. Delaney, we will give you the opportunity to respond first to our next question, a 1-minute question as well. What is your understanding of the causes of inflation and what policies should be changed to address inflation?
Well, our Fed is actually the entity that is the one that is really works with our interest rates and helping combat inflation. Inflation happens obviously from market forces, and there is a inflation issue around the world. I think it's a set of different ways of looking at ways that we can both cut our interest rates, improve our competitiveness, and I think how we combat it is really looking at affordability, innovation, investing in infrastructure and different places in our economy so that we can grow our businesses. And also, we have to, look at monopolies and look at some of the ways in which, some of our monopolies across, with respect to not price gouging, but thinking ways that we can have a fair and level playing field so that there is more competition in the marketplace to be able for consumers to have an effective choice. Excuse me.
Thank you. So, Mr. Parrott, what is your understanding of how we should change policies to address inflation?
First, I just want to say that inflation affects all of us. Here I live in the district. I see people when I go to the stores. I talk to my neighbors. Just this last winter, one of my neighbors called me and said, Neil, do you have the same problem with your electric bill that I have? I mean, it's way higher than last year. What's going on? And, he's on a fixed income. And so it's a real problem. We need to help people. 25% groceries have gone up in the last 3 years since Biden and Harris have been there. 30% electricity has gone up. Gas has almost doubled. Good luck getting a mortgage on a new home. The interest rates are too high. The main cause, of course, is we're flooding the market with new dollars. So the value of that product is the same, but you have a whole lot of new dollars in, so you're going to pay more dollars for that same product. When you send me to D.C., I'm going to make sure to work to reduce inflation, to help people in their everyday lives. Trump has said that he wants to lower the cost of electricity by half. I think we can do that by changing the policies and using electricity that really works, not investing in things that the free market wouldn't support.
Okay. And Mr. Parrott, you will receive the next question of 1 minute in duration first. What is the proper role of the federal government as it relates to the price of commodities and utilities like gasoline, broadband, internet access, and natural gas?
Well, the government...
The proper role.
Yeah, the government needs to make sure that things are fair, but at the same time, they can't come in and say, you're going to pay this much for a commodity or that much. We need to make sure, the government needs to make sure that the policy decisions are made and not have over-regulation. And what we're seeing right now is over-regulation. Even in the state of Maryland, they're saying that you can't, for electricity, many different ways that you're not allowed to really do it. They have these goals that we're going to get rid of all fossil fuels. Well, it's way too fast, way too early. One of the problems that we have is electric vehicles. They're saying by 2035, if you want to buy any new vehicle in Maryland, it's going to have to be electric. Well, that's the most expensive type. The second highest thing that anyone spends money on is their transportation. First is your house, then transportation. And to tell us that you could only have one type of vehicle, that doesn't make sense. Send me to D.C., I'm going to say that no state can have this kind of regulation, that there needs to be a free market for vehicles when people go to buy them.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Ms. Delaney?
And could you repeat the question again?
Surely. What is the proper role of the federal government as it relates to the price of commodities like utilities, gasoline, broadband, internet access, and natural gas?
Of course, we live in a free market economy, but I think that there is a difference between certain of these commodities and commodities that we think which are really necessary, like electricity, like water, like broadband. Those are really utilities that are necessary for each of us to have a meaningful life. So if you're talking about some of these commodities like broadband, I helped roll out the $42 billion broadband program, and certain of these places will never receive broadband unless there's some type of government subsidy. Same with electricity or with water. We need sometimes as a government to step in to help subsidize or to work with the private sector and making sure that everyone has access to clean water, to electricity, to broadband. When we start to get into things like gasoline and other parts, it's more of a international issue where I think that we are helping the free market economy with negotiation and in terms of some of our global relationships. But I'll see that.
Thank you.
It's a combination. Thank you.
Mr. Parrott, we'll be doing a 1-minute response, and you're first on the next question we have. What would be your approach, if any, to changing and reforming our tax code?
I'll tell you what, our taxes are very, very complicated right now. We need to simplify the whole tax code. I'd like to see a flatter type tax. I'd like to see us be able to have less taxes. You know, when I was a delegate, I signed a taxpayer protection pledge, and for 12 years, I never voted for one tax or fee increase. I've also signed a pledge going forward in the federal government that I will not support tax or fee increases. And that includes keeping the Trump tax cuts in place. I think it's very important that we keep them. Small businesses like mine, S Corporation, the pass-throughs, they really rely on what happened with that bill. So I think it's very important that we make sure, again, to simplify the tax code from where it is right now. And, you know, when you send me to D.C., I'm an engineer. I like to work for practical solutions. When I look at the tax code, I'm going to work with all the rest of the House, of course, whoever's president, and the U.S. Senate, to make sure we can work together to do something that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Delaney?
So one of the reasons I really decided to run for Congress is I think we need to have common sense, common ground solutions, and that comes with respect to our taxes. You know, there's a world of hurt out there right now, and I think it's important that coming out of COVID, coming out of, you know, so much inflationary pressure and where we are right now, that we go easy on any type of, you know, big, you know, we should not be raising taxes on our middle class. We should be thinking about reinstituting our child tax credit, because that is the best way to put money back in the pockets of working families. And, you know, it's you know, I would go easy right now in terms of thinking about how we, with our businesses, you know, coming out with all the inflationary pressures and where we are, I think it's like do no harm. So I think it's a very, you know, that we need to think carefully and cautiously as we move forward. And we also need to work on issues of affordability. I think that is really key at this point.
Thank you. And Ms. Delaney, we will begin our next 1-minute question with you. As Washington County continues to grow, there is a need for additional significant public investment in infrastructure and highway maintenance. How do you intend to increase federal spending to support the infrastructure needs in the western portion of your district?
So very important, and this is actually leans deep into my background as an infrastructure leader, both, you know, working in for-profit and also most recently at the Department of Commerce. I think it's really important right now to invest in our highways, our digital highways in terms of broadband, but also, you know, 81, 270, and 15 are really important for workforce development, but also they're unsafe. And so really driving, clawing back some of that money that came from the earmark that Congressman Trone got to make these safer is really important, and to really work with our federal government to look at investing in the infrastructure and cleaning up these roads, fixing them. In addition, I think it's really important. I worked on some of the CHIPS Innovation Fund and broadband connectivity infrastructure within the government. I think we need to really apply for those grants as business and public-private partnerships to help workforce development and job creation here in Washington County.
Mr. Parrott?
It's very true that we need to invest in our infrastructure. Here in Washington County, I-81, you might be familiar, we need to widen it. I mean, it needs to be widened to 6 lanes, and it needs to be widened from the West Virginia line all the way to the Pennsylvania line. And, you know, we had the money to do that. Governor Hogan was ready to move forward with that project. Westmore came in and killed the project. He had the federal money. 80% was going to be federal, but it was only 20% state. Why did he kill the project? Well, he's kind of tried to move it to the Red Line in Baltimore to build a light rail system. Really is not going to help any businesses or any communities. We have to widen I-81 here. That's going to be one of my top priorities. You know, I've talked to the owners of Volvo, and they have shift work. And what happens when I-81, if there's a crash, which happens quite often, unfortunately, people can't show up for the shift work, and they're delayed on getting their product out. We can't have that. We need to support businesses in this area, and we have to have I-81 widened. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Parrott, we're still going to limit you to 1 minute. We have a rather long question for you next. Local realtors tell us that the current average selling price of a house in Washington County is $364,000. To afford that level of housing, you need an annual income of about $100,000. However, the current median household income in Washington County is only $73,000. How do you provide for the needs of people whose income falls short of the income needed to purchase a home in Washington County? In other words, how do we keep everyone housed?
Well, it's interesting. We need to figure out why we got to where we are. And, you know, part of the problem is that we have a border security problem with the United States and Mexico. We've had over 8 million people come into this country in just the last 3 years. And the population of the state of Maryland is just over 6 million. So you think about that. The entire state of Maryland's population has come across our border, and they need somewhere to stay. And so they're buying houses across this country, and that's going to, you know, supply and demand. You have a lot more demand now. The supplies remain pretty much the same. One thing we have to do, too, you know, I've talked to different people who are builders, and they have a really hard time building their houses. They have the investment, they want to build the houses, and yet there are so many restrictions, and it takes so long to get through the approval process through the county and through the state. We've got to simplify these processes. We have to allow developers to be able to build when they're ready to build and help them to be able to move forward. Once we do that, we'll increase the stock of houses, and the house prices could go down. We've got to secure the border, though. We can't continue to allow this influx of our population to this country.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Ms. Delaney, how do we keep everyone housed?
Well, I probably take a dispute with Mr. Parrott on that our immigration problem is one of the key drivers of affordability of housing. Affordability of housing is really an important issue for everyone across this country, everyone across the 6th District, and particularly in Washington County. There's a lot of things that you can do on a state, local, and federal levels. With respect to a federal level, I think we really need to look at, you know, some housing subsidies. We need to think about first-time home buyers, how we can help them, and we can, you know, look also at like how Fannie and Freddie Mac, in terms of, revamping and looking at some of, you know, the higher credit thresholds and maybe loosening some of the access to credit on a federal level. On a state level, also, I think we need to really look at cutting red tape, zoning, and permitting, because that really adds 20 to 30% onto some of the housing, the cost for housing. Higher density housing would also help. And really working together closely, there's some innovative ideas in Cumberland and Frederick and how they're looking at zoning and using public-private resources.
Thank you, Ms. Delaney. Our next question goes first to you. What are your long-term solutions to address energy independence combined with a transition to a greener economy, including the use of fossil fuels and alternative sources of energy?
Well, listen, we all know, looking at North Carolina, climate is an existential threat. And we've got to do and look at everything we can to transition to a green economy. But it doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight. And we've got to look at it transition gradually and look at how we can drive it in a way which makes sense. I think the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, had a lot of wonderful ways to drive investment, which also drives good paying jobs in green energy, in solar, in windmills. But also, you're right, we've got to look at how we have this transition with the EV cars. I think that it is important that we transition to more electric cars, but it's got to be in a way which is common sense and consumer driven. We've got to look at a transition which makes sense, particularly in Washington County across Western Maryland, because the infrastructure is not quite there yet. So I think it's balancing on a federal level how we transition to that in a way which makes sense, common sense.
Thank you. Mr. Parrott?
Yes, can you repeat the question?
Surely. What are your long-term solutions to address energy independence combined with a transition to greener economy, including use of fossil fuels and alternative sources of energy?
I like to see the free market work. I don't like to see the government come in and have regulations that are going to cause us to use things that are inefficient and don't work very well. When the Biden-Harris administration started, they stopped the Keystone XL pipeline that would have taken natural gas and gasoline from Canada to southern United States. But at the same exact time, they approved the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. They said, go ahead and build it, which we had stopped the United States for good strategic reasons. Nord Stream 2 went from Russia to Europe. So Russia's getting rich, and we're not able to get the fuel that we should have. We need to do things that are going to bring down the cost of fuel. We need to be able to drill. The first thing that the Biden-Harris administration did was there were a lot of leases that were agreed to on federal lands. They said, no, you can no longer drill for gas or oil in those. Those need to be reopened up. We need to make sure that we bring the cost back down. Remember, it's 30% higher than it was just 3 years ago. I want to help everyday households. We need to do things that are going to help our citizens and bring down the cost of energy.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. And we will give our next question to you first, and it's a 1-minute question. We move now to a series of questions relating to health and Social Security. We begin with this one. The largest generation in our history, the baby boom generation, continues to retire. Many fear that our country's Social Security system is not on sound footing. What measures, if any, should be taken to ensure the retirement benefits will be strong for future generations?
It's a shame. People think, Social Security, we're paying into it. There's a big old pile of money. It's earning interest every year, and we're just going to draw down from that. That's fictional. It doesn't exist. They've been stealing that money ever since they created the program. The last time that we had a balanced budget in this country goes back to President Clinton. Newt Gingrich and the Republicans in the House and the U.S. Senate were disciplined about the spending, and also Clinton went along with it. And so we had a balanced budget. It's time that we bring a balanced budget back to the United States. It's really how the United States stays funded, not just Social Security and Medicare. We have to have the whole country doing well. And once we do that, we can make sure that these programs are funded like they need to be funded. It's vital that we keep, like you talked about, the baby boomers are retiring now. It's vital they continue to receive the benefits that they've invested and they've paid into for their entire lives. But that's not going to happen if we continue to borrow trillions of dollars like we did in the last administration. It was under the guise of COVID, and they just gave people checks, you might remember. But we can't afford that. We're not the richest country in the world. We're actually the largest debtor nation in the world.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Ms. Delaney?
Well, first of all, Social Security is one of the most successful programs ever that we've instituted, and it is a lifeline for so many of our retirees. And it's incredibly important for those people who have paid in for their entire life that they are able to take out that money. And many people use it as just to help with other things that they have, but many people, it's their sole way of being able to support themselves. Making sure that it is fiscal and stable and there is very important. It's going to take a bipartisan, common sense, common ground solution to come together. Congressman Larson right now has a bipartisan solution on Capitol Hill that really deals with, as we pay into, you pay into Social Security to about, I think, $160,000, and then you don't have payments anymore. There's a new solution of not on the middle class, not on, people who cannot afford it, but those maybe over $400,000 or $500,000 might be able to, would then start paying in again to Social Security so that it would stay solvent and be able to pay for all those who retire.
Thank you, Ms. Delaney. And we will give you first opportunity at our next question. 1 minute again. Should Medicare have the authority to negotiate drug prices?
Absolutely. This is something that the Biden-Harris administration just recently negotiated, but it has been on the table for multiple presidential terms, and on both sides of the aisle, by the way. Big Pharma came in 20 years ago and said that you cannot negotiate with the government for these prices. Who pays for it? Unfortunately, Big Pharma across the world was selling their drugs cheaper than they were doing here. Why? Because we, as taxpayer monies, were subsidizing it. I think it's incredibly important that we have brought down the cost of prescription drugs, and we need to do more of that. It actually helps with our deficit. It actually helps fund our Medicare and our Medicaid, and and even all of our drug companies are going to be able to still make healthy profits, but be able also that we are not paying outsized, ridiculous payments for insulin and other necessary drugs.
Thank you, Ms. Delaney. Mr. Parrott?
This is a large issue because, on the one hand, people need to be able to afford the drugs that they need to get. On the other hand, I'd like to encourage companies to continue to innovate and come up with new drugs. Someone very, very close to me has Parkinson's. They don't have a solution for that. But it takes 10 years after they've invested a lot of money and time, 10 more years before they get approved. I think we need to speed up that process. But at the same time, we need to make it profitable for drug companies to say, yes, I'm going to continue with this investment so we can have new innovations and new things that are going to help people. So there's a balance. But I tell you, we shouldn't be paying more in this country than Canada is, for instance. We need to make sure that we have the costs that are the same. Once they have the drug on the market, it's easy for someone to copycat it, but we need to make sure that copycats are stopped and make sure that fair prices are being paid all across the world, not just in this country. And we need to make sure that incentives stay so people continue to innovate and come up with new drugs and things that will help people.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. So the next question will come first to you as well. Should the Medicare approach to health care be extended to all citizens?
No. I don't want the government take over the whole healthcare system. That's what we're talking about. I think the private market needs to work. We see with the private market that we have costs that can come down. Unfortunately, when you have the government that would take over, we see this in other countries. You can go to France. We had a good friend in France who, they've got free healthcare there, but they didn't diagnose that she couldn't have children. She came here to this country. They found out exactly what it was, but it was a little bit too late. I don't want to have long lines for healthcare. I don't want to have higher costs for healthcare. That's what we're going to get if we have a government takeover of the healthcare system. It's not going to help everyday citizens, and that's what I'm about. I'm an engineer. I like to see practical solutions. I like to think things that are actually going to work, and I think we need to make sure that the private market is able to stay in the healthcare business and able to help people get the best health care in a timely manner. And we should be able to see how much it costs when you actually go and get some procedure done or get some drugs. You need to know exactly, but we don't know that now. So people need to be able to shop around. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Ms. Delaney?
I think you're asking am I for Medicare for all? Is that indirectly what you're saying? Listen, we need to have universal health care. We need everyone in this country, and we do have universal health care now. It's called the emergency room, right? But that is the most inefficient and ineffective way for us to distribute health care. But everyone, no matter what, should have access to a safety net of core services. That does not mean Medicare for all. I am not for that. I am for universal health care and building upon the ACA. But, a single payer is ridiculous. My husband's father was a union electrician. He worked his whole life giving up pay increases so he could have a good health care plan. So what are we going to do? Go to these union electricians and say, no, you get Medicare for all? No, we want public and private coming together. You can still have your private, insurance-based healthcare system, but we should also have a safety net for those who don't have it that is affordable and able to be provided so that everyone has some ability to have a safety net of healthcare.
Thank you, Ms. Delaney. Our next question will go to you first. In light of the overturning of Roe versus Wade, what are your views on the role of the federal government on women's reproductive rights?
Thank you for asking this question. I am the mother of 4 daughters, 31 to 17, and I feel very strongly that reproductive freedoms and choice are something core to women and girls. And, that's why we call it choice. But, I do think that this has been established for over 50 years, that there's something with the sanctity of one's own integrity and body. And it is, for me, I would work in Congress to codify Roe v. Wade as it currently is, but also maternal health in general. I do not think that where you are in this country, that your rights should be different than in my home state of Idaho or in West Virginia than it is in Maryland. It's a personal issue for me. I almost died of an ectopic pregnancy in my 30s. I was in 45 minutes of hemorrhaging to death. Had I not had that procedure, I would have died. And if I were in West Virginia or in Idaho now, I would have. And some people are now. So it's very important we have these protections.
Thank you, Ms. Delaney. Mr. Parrott?
Yeah, this is an interesting issue. People are trying to say this is front and center, something we should consider our votes on. But you look at Nikki Haley in the last debate, she said, really, this issue is not going to be decided at the federal level. It's going to be decided at the state level. You're not going to get 60 votes in the U.S. Senate to decide one way or the other. My opponent has said that I don't want exceptions for rape, incest, the life of the mother. I definitely do. I've always have. And I've said that numerous times, and yet mailings keep going out saying that I don't. But I think it's important to realize that it is up to the states, that when you vote for Congress, you're not really voting on this issue. But I will talk about the ectopic pregnancy, and I'm really sorry that happens. It actually happened to someone really close to me and my family. That they need to do what they're going to do to take care of that. But in West Virginia and all these other states, they would have done the exact same procedure. That's an exaggeration. There are exceptions for the life of the mother, and there's other states as there should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Our next question for you. If elected, on which congressional committees would you like to serve and why?
So I'm a problem solver. I'm an engineer. I'm actually a transportation engineer. So the Transportation Infrastructure Committee would be my top choice to be on. And, this area really needs that kind of attention. I-81 needs to be widened. I-270 in Frederick, US 15. If you go further west, US 219 in Allegheny County, and then going up into Pennsylvania needs to be widened. We have to work with other congressmen to make these things happen. US 219 could connect two major points. All these roads I've mentioned are north-south corridors. That's what we need to improve. Send me to Congress. I'll try and get on that committee, and I'll make sure that we get the funds that we need to do. And I'll also put pressure on Westmore and the state to make sure that we actually get these projects moving forward and make sure the money is actually allocated towards these projects, not some other one. And, in Montgomery County, there's the White's Ferry. We need to open the White's Ferry back up. That's a historic ferry. It's been there for over 100 years. And it shouldn't have shut down, but it did because of a private land dispute. But now it's time for the government to get involved and help it to reopen to serve our community.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Ms. Delaney?
I have to take part of my response to rebut on the abortion issue. One, the reason we have elections, Project 2025, and if you look at many of the conservative groups, the reason that you say you won't have, we'll never get to 60 votes and we'll never have nationwide bans on abortion, exactly is why who you elect to Congress matters. Because if you do get to that threshold, you will have enough people to be able to make that an issue. And it should not be a state-by-state issue because your constitutional rights of who you are as a woman should not be on geography. And there was a personhood amendment that he voted for, and I have lots of different things on abortion that did have no exemptions for those life, what have you. I would like to be on the Commerce Committee because I believe in driving infrastructure investments into and additional commerce into Western Maryland. I'd also like to work on transportation and potentially national security.
Ms. Delaney, 1 minute to answer. Will you support continued aid to Ukraine, and if so, with what limitations?
I definitely would support continued aid to the Ukraine. When I was in the Department of Commerce, I spent many overseas trips working on international telecom and almost 50 bilaterals. And I'll never forget, one said, "Das Delaney, the world is watching." And they said, if that's what democracy looks like, I'm not sure. we want it. The problem is I think that we are a stable beacon of light in the world. We have to push back against despots and tyrants. And if we do not fight the Ukraine, give money and keep on fighting in the Ukraine, Putin will then start taking that across Europe and towards us. I think it's very important to stand up for democracy, for these people who are fighting over there. And I think it is important for us to have their back and also to engage diplomatically with NATO and across the world. Both our economic security is our national security. So we need to come together, and we cannot disengage. We have to be incredibly engaged.
Thank you, Ms. Delaney. Mr. Parrott.
You know, it's interesting to look and see how did we get to this point? Why did they invade Ukraine? All you have to do is look at Afghanistan. With the Biden-Harris administration, I never thought I'd see a retreat like we saw from Vietnam, with the helicopters leaving. We saw that in Afghanistan. Helicopters leave, and we saw airplanes where people are clinging to the outside of the airplane and then plunging to their deaths. Why did they cling to those airplanes? They clung to them because the United States was leaving them. They were leaving them to face a certain death by the people who were going to take over in Afghanistan. That showed extreme weakness to the rest of the world. Putin saw it, took advantage of it, and he didn't just do it right away. He spent months building up his army around the Ukraine border and basically had the green light, where the United States is really not going to do much. Until after he went in, they didn't take over in a few weeks like they thought was going to happen. Then there was some world pressure, and Biden finally acted. We need to work to have a peace in the Ukraine. I'm out of time.
Mr. Parrott, our next question comes to you first. When confronted with international conflicts, for instance, between Israel and Hamas, how do your views of human rights and the support of democracy help you arrive at your position?
I think that we need to come from a position of strength. You know, Reagan said that you need to have peace through strength. The United States has shown weakness. We need to make sure that we have a strong military. You send me to Congress, I'll be working to make sure that we have that strong military. I think what we need to make sure is that the world knows that we're going to stand with our allies. Israel is one of our biggest allies. What we saw happen on October 6th, again, it was a result of the weakness in Afghanistan, and then we saw Ukraine happen, and we funded Iran. I mean, a lot of this is our fault. Hamas and Hezbollah got their money directly from Iran, and they got it because of the policies, first of Obama and then of the Biden-Harris administration, where they tried to have this nuclear deal. I was actually in D.C. with Ted Cruz and Donald Trump before he was president, standing up against that deal because we knew that it was going to lead to problems around the world, and it did. They funded Hamas, they funded Hezbollah. We need to defund Iran, and that's a big source of the problem. And when you send me to Congress, I'm going to make sure we do the steps that we need to do to make sure that they don't have the resources that they have right now.
Ms. Delaney.
Listen, we just came up on a year on that horrific attack in Israel. And if you saw the women and the children and the footage, you can't unsee that footage if you've ever seen it. We have to stand by Israel and defend them in terms of, the release of the hostages. And of course, we want to secure some peace talks and figure out a way out of this. But we have to stand up. Hamas, we could have ended this conflict a long time ago if Hamas would have agreed to return the hostages. And instead, it has gone on for more than a year. And now we are looking at additional conflict in Lebanon. Really, we're looking at Hezbollah is a proxy for Iran. And Iran has military weapons. And Iran does not have good intentions towards the West or towards us. So I think we have to stand with our allies. We have to stand against tyrants and terrorism. And we also have to be empathetic and care about all those people that are still there. So making sure minimization of civilian life.
Our next question comes to you first. What are the reforms to legal immigration that need to occur?
Well, we've got to fix this mess at the border. I mean, I don't know anyone who doesn't believe that we need comprehensive bipartisan immigration reform. And so I think it's incredibly important. And we did have a bipartisan bill on the table. It was drafted by a conservative member of the House, a conservative legislator from Oklahoma, Langford. And he had worked meticulously to do a couple of things: secure the border by additional border agents, looking at more resources, looking at more technology, and we also need to clean up the asylum mess in terms of really, streamlining our asylum. In that, sometimes you go through and then don't get a court for a hearing for 3, 4, 5 different years. It's incredibly important. We also need to look at business visas for our employers and have a pathway to legal citizenship for our dreamers and for those that are here.
Thank you, Ms. Delaney. Mr. Parrott, what are the reforms to legal immigration that need to occur?
Well, first on day one, talk about illegal immigration. We have to secure the border. We need to fund the border wall. We need to have electronic surveillance above and below the wall. We need to take this border seriously. And unfortunately, this current administration has not taken it seriously at all. And we talked about 8 million illegal aliens. But, it's killing Marylanders. 2,000 people have died in a year from fentanyl deaths in Maryland because we have this open border. They've lost over 300,000 children. They don't know where they are. Some of them are now sex slaves. Some of them are regular slaves. We can't have, a lot of them are being mistreated. That's really inexcusable. We have to have a secure border, and we have to know what's happening when people come into our country. Now, as far as legal immigration, we need to be able to streamline that process and make it easier. We need the best and brightest from around the world to come to the United States and make that an easy process to have happen.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. And the Government Affairs Committee will have to rethink how we pose this particular set of questions, because we really wanted to separate the two issues of legal and illegal. So you'll be amused at our next question. Mr. Parrott, what methods or solutions do you recommend to address illegal immigration? And maybe you'll want to mix in some more thoughts on legal.
Hey, with legal, let me talk about that. I've talked to people in this district from different countries, India, China, other countries. Some of them, they've graduated from U.S. colleges. They're great people. We really want them here in this country. They can't even get a green card. And so if their company were to go out of business, or for whatever reason they need to lay this person off or fire them, they'd have to go back to their country. They're dependent on that one company. I think it needs to be easier for them to get this green card to be able to stay. But we look at illegal aliens. It was called a bipartisan bill, but it wasn't really bipartisan. Almost every Republican I know was completely opposed to it. That bill allowed 5,000 illegal aliens per day to come to this country. That's 1.8 million a year. Look, the law is the law. We don't allow one person to come into the country illegally. That's not something that we permit or allow. But we do need to work together. And when you send me to D.C., I'm going to work with Democrats and Republicans. We're going to work together to make sure that we enforce our border, we have a secure border, and we work to reform our legal immigration system to let people be able to come in. Again, the best and brightest, attract them and allow them to come into this country.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Ms. Delaney?
Well, I dispute that it was not a bipartisan bill. It was, and there were many Republicans and many Democrats, and had it gone to the floor, it would have passed. It was not perfect until it was put into political football for the election season. It was not perfect, but it was a good bite at the apple. And you know what? Perfect is the enemy of the good. Let's try and figure out how to stop the stem of this illegal migration and figure out a way to streamline legal migration. We need more legal migration. We need to figure out ways. Do you know that 50% of farm workers in this country, our farmers depend on those that don't have the right permits to work? If you think about it, there is so many technology companies. We need to figure out ways to get more people to go through the process and not take 3-4 years for a green card. And so it's the ways in which we streamline the process for legal immigration, and also obviously stem what we can in terms of illegal migration.
Thank you, Ms. Delaney. Ms. Delaney, we will give you the next 1-minute question.
I wish we had longer than a minute, because sometimes it's just not quite enough. Right?
It
Just
creates
that
discipline.
Extra minute.
What is your position on the federal government's role on student loan forgiveness or loan interest caps?
Student affordability is a huge issue for all of us. And, I can go into into affordability of colleges, but I think that, we have to work with our our students and making sure that there is not usury interest rates for all of these students. I mean, sometimes these loan companies just have outrageously high interest rates, and people pay off their loans for years. Looking and working with the federal government in terms of bringing down those costs is really important. But I also think looking at affordability of college education and workforce development more generally, making community colleges free, looking at ways that we can work with our state colleges and our workforce development, and bringing down all of those costs collectively, because we really need to help our students. My own brother spent almost 25 years paying off his student debt. It was like a mortgage. It's ridiculous.
Thank you, Ms. Delaney. Mr. Parrott?
I think if someone takes a loan, they need to pay back the loan. I mean, it's pretty simple. We're not saying somebody should get housing forgiveness on their loans. And yet we're asking this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, they've come up with a student loan forgiveness plan where they're saying, well, you welders and everybody who went into the trades, we don't care about you. You're going to have to pay off this person who went to school for 4 years. No, that's not fair. What we need to do, though, is have more financial education in our schools. When I was a delegate, I worked with Delegate Jay Walker from Prince George's County. He's a Democrat, I'm a Republican. We worked together to say you need to have financial education in the schools so that the students, when they take these loans, before they do, they understand what they're doing. They understand the cost of debt. They understand what's happening. But unfortunately, it's not happening in our schools. And there's some movement towards it because of what Jay Walker and I both did. And I think that needs to happen more in our schools so the kids can make more intelligent decisions as they take those loans. As a delegate, I also had a scholarship program, and for all first-year students, they had to do an essay on basically a cost-benefit analysis and to cut off, make sure they understood the loan process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. So, surprise, the next question goes to Ms. Delaney for 1 minute. Which federal agency is doing the best job, and why? And what other federal agencies could benefit from those best practices?
Well, seeing that I worked at the Department of Commerce for rock star Gina Raimondo, I think they are doing an incredible job in this administration, because it's really about U.S. competitiveness. If you think about it, we really need to drive innovation across the board and make our companies more competitive. I love the fact that we were able to have bipartisan legislation that allowed for infrastructure investment, allowed for chips, and I did a lot of this work vis-a-vis Huawei and 5G, and looking at some of these international players that really subsidize on their home populations, their cell phone base like China, and then undercuts the rest of the world. Thinking about ways that we can work in government through commerce has been really helpful, because our national security and economic security are tied. I also think that the FAA has had a lot of headwinds in terms of some of the issues it's faced in terms of understaffing, and it needs some more resources.
Thank you, Ms. Delaney. Mr. Parrott?
Well, it's interesting. I look at what's happened over the last 3 years, and I know there are a lot of really good people who are working for the government, but I see a lot of failure. I look at the Department of Transportation, and you might remember those shipping things that happened right when the elections happened. Instead of helping with that situation, Buttigieg went on maternity leave, and we couldn't get the products in their country. That was an existential problem. We needed the help. He was gone. If you might remember, people couldn't get baby formula. I look at FEMA. They should have a huge response in North Carolina, and they're not. It's embarrassing what's happening. They're funding other people, but they won't fund North Carolina. They spent $2 billion from their budget to house and feed illegal aliens, and now we don't have the resources that we need for North Carolina for our own people. That should have never happened. The border, those folks are doing a great job. They just came out. They want to do their job, but they're being prohibited from doing their job, and they're letting illegals go across this country. They're letting drugs come in. We've got to give them the resources. We've got to change, and there needs to be accountability, and Congress needs to make sure there's accountability for the dollars that we're giving them.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Ms. Delaney, do you support term limits for members of Congress? How many terms? Why or why not?
So I'm just going to say I'm really proud of FEMA, and I'm really proud of a lot of those. It's really difficult, and to politicize at such a hard time when we are dealing with all these storms is not a good thing to do. And lifting up and us coming together, not in a partisan way, is really important to lift us all up as a world and as a community, as in a country. So let's not play partisanship with that. With respect to term limits, listen, some people would say you have that every election is a term limit, and that people are voted out all of the time in terms of term limits, whether they are not doing their job because of a change of politics. And so I would say it's a difficult thing to do. It's interesting, but a difficult thing to do because it's a constitutional amendment, so it would be very hard. The thing I would focus on is independent commissions for independent districts in terms of drawing the districts. We have too much gerrymandering, which it causes us to be too partisan across the board. So I would focus more on independent districting so that we have...
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. Mr. Parrott, term limits.
Yeah, I've signed the term limit pledge. Basically, I support term limits. I'm not going to term limit myself because I don't think that's fair if one side does and the other side doesn't. But I do support an amendment to the U.S. Constitution to say there should be term limits in the U.S. House and in the U.S. Senate. You know, it's interesting. We talk about gerrymandering. I've worked for decades to make sure that District 6 was fair. I've taken people to court and actually won. That's why this district is so competitive right now. I work with Judicial Watch. We won the lawsuit. As a result, this district is competitive. I also introduced, as a delegate, having independent commissions draw the district lines here in Maryland. I support that idea. Of course, I introduced the bills. I also introduced bills that said that you need to live in the district where you're actually going to run. Unfortunately, this didn't pass, but I do think it should. I think if someone's going to run for a district, they need to live in that congressional district.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Ms. Delaney. So assume that both you and Mr. Parrott have ended up in Congress serving on the same committee. How will you introduce your opponent to the other members of your committee? Tell us something you admire about your opponent.
Do you know, I admire that he cares very much about his community and that he started a swim club with his wife. Because my daughters were swimmers, my daughters are big athletes. I believe in empowering our kids and community. And I think it's really important to build community. And I think we have too much partisanship and rhetoric and divisiveness, and I believe that we need to start at the ground level up in having Rotaries, civic organizations, and community builders like our sports. And so the fact that he actually came up with his wife to build this swim club and help all these kids learn how to swim and to be together is really important. And I do believe that when you come to Congress, you work across the aisle. When I worked in nonprofit and I worked for Common Sense Media, I said I was kid partisan. I didn't say I was Republican. I didn't say I was Democrat. I worked on kids' online safety. I worked on privacy. And I had both Republicans and Democrats come together to get stuff done.
Thank you, Ms. Delaney. Mr. Parrott.
Well, first, wouldn't it be great if we could both win? Hey, we get twice the representation. I think it'd be great. Look, I would introduce her. I'd say, here we have someone that's really good from the state of Maryland, someone that's really served our community. She did work with Common Sense Media and tried to help children. She raised 4 daughters, great family person, and someone who served in different roles, even in the Biden administration. So I think it would be nice if we could both, again, win, be serving in D.C. Unfortunately, we do have to make a choice if people are going to choose in this election.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. And now, the one you've been waiting for, our final question. And we go to Ms. Delaney first. What makes you the best candidate for the position of representative to Congress from Maryland's 6th Congressional District, and why should we vote for you? And you have 2 minutes.
I have had a lifetime of experiences, having raised 4 children, of course, from 31 to 6 as girls. I really believe in fighting and lifting up girls and protecting the reproductive freedoms, protecting their rights, but also of all of our children. I ran for this seat because I really, truly care about the future of our country and the future that our children will inherit. We have so many pivotal issues happening right now. The world's on fire. We have climate issues that are resulting in things in North Carolina. We are dealing with an immigration fiasco. We've got issues of our debt and affordability. And we have to work on these issues together in terms of, good paying jobs, affordability, figuring out how we come together in terms of our national security and looking at all these issues. I feel that I bring a lifetime of experiences in public, private, and nonprofit. And I've done them at very senior level roles. But most importantly, what I've done is I've communicated across stakeholders, many different stakeholders, to convene them to come together to actually have a solution. And that's what it takes in Congress, to understand how to take federal types of regulations, which I've had tons of experience at. I've not held elected office. I've been in business. I've been in nonprofit, but I understand how DC works. But I also grew up in Buell, Idaho. I understand rural America. I understand what it's like to live in a town of 3,500 with community, and people want to live there and have their kids have the same opportunities and to be able to stay there. So I want to drive infrastructure investment into Western Maryland. I want to help figure out how we rebuild bridges. And I want to help our children understand that they can have an inclusive, better place for tomorrow. And I want to be able to dialogue across differences.
Thank you,
That's
Ms.
why.
Delaney. Mr. Parrott,
I'm guessing this is the final question. Is that right?
this is your final question. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And you can't phone a friend.
This is going to be a very close election. When you look at the polls, it's back and forth. It's within the margin of error. I think the voters have a clear choice. When you vote for me, you're going to vote for someone whose priority is to help families and help people in this district. I want to bring inflation down. I think food costs too much. Electricity costs too much. We can change the policies. Trump has said he wants to bring electricity costs down in half. I believe that can happen if we have the right leadership in place. We have the right policies. Gas, we can bring those costs down. We can be an exporter of energy like we were 3 years ago instead of a big importer of energy. We can try to defund people like Iran who are taking our money and using it for bad purposes, or even Russia. A lot of the reason they have a lot of money is because of the oil and because they're making money on that oil. Mortgages, they cost too much. We need to do things that are going to help everyday families. When you send me to D.C., I'll be working for everyday families. When people see me in the grocery store, when I go to church, when I'm out and about, even recreation, people will talk to me, they'll stop me, they'll say, oh yeah, this is what's going on, this is how you can help, and I want to be that help. I want to be that person that serves this community as a member of this community. I believe we need to have manufacturing jobs that come back. I was at Luke Paper Mill, the town of Luke, where the paper mill shut down. I was there last week, and it's devastating to that community. We have to have manufacturing jobs come back to the United States, and in particular back to Western Maryland. We need to keep Volvo trucks here. We need to expand manufacturing jobs here. To do that, we need to make sure that we have policies that are going to bring down those costs of electricity again, to attract those businesses here. If you want a clean environment, you want people to come to the United States to build here to make sure that it's clean. I want to secure the border. People are dying every single day because of this open border. Kids are missing. It's a top priority. We just have to do it. And of course, local issues like ID. All right, I'm out of time. So much I want to say. Clear choice. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate each and every one of you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. I want to thank the audience for abiding by our rules of decorum this morning, and we thank our two candidates. Shall we give them our appreciation?
All right, just to close things up, how about a round of applause for our moderator, Richard? I thought he did a wonderful job. Again, thanks to both our speakers, both our candidates. We appreciate your time this morning. We appreciate the information that you gave us. Everyone in the room is a voter, so I trust that you're going to get out and use your vote as you see fit. I think we were given great information here this morning to help us all make a decision. And again, get out and vote. Thanks to the Chamber staff again today for hosting this event, and we hope you all have a wonderful day.